I always imagined my wedding as a blur of joy, laughter, and harmless chaos. Flowers, music, smiling faces, all melting together into something warm and unreal. That fantasy shattered in a single second. I was standing at the head table, champagne sweating in my hand, listening to applause fade, when I saw my mother-in-law lean toward me. Her movement was smooth, practiced, almost affectionate. Then I saw it, a tiny vial, pinched between her fingers, tilted just enough for something clear to slide into my glass. My instincts screamed before my mind could catch up. My stomach dropped, my ears rang, and yet my face stayed calm. I smiled. I nodded. I pretended nothing had happened while my heart slammed louder than the music. In that instant, years of quiet tension snapped into focus. The comments about my habits. The way she corrected me gently in public. The way boundaries always felt optional to her. All of it lined up into one terrifying picture. I knew this wasn't anxiety or imagination. This was control, deliberate and hidden. Panic tried to take over, but I forced it down. I made a decision that would define everything after. I would not confront her. I would not cause a scene. I would not run from my own wedding. I would observe, think, and survive. With a steady hand that didn't match the fear inside my chest, I switched our glasses. I laughed at a joke I didn't hear. I blended back into the celebration like nothing was wrong. Every nerve stayed alert as I waited. Guests laughed around me, glasses clinking, unaware of the shift beneath the surface. I watched faces, counted breaths, and felt time stretch thin. Somewhere inside that noise, a truth was waking, and it wasn't gentle at all right now. I truly believed that choice might protect me quietly. I had no idea it would expose everything I thought I knew about her, about my marriage, and about how dangerous silence can be. And as the music swelled again, I waited for the first crack to appear. I need you to understand who I was before that moment. I was the people-pleasing daughter turned responsible bride, proud of building peace in uncomfortable rooms. I learned early that harmony was survival, and I carried that belief everywhere I went. My husband came from a tight family where his mother ruled softly but absolutely. She never yelled. She smiled, corrected, and kept score. From our first meeting, I felt measured, compared, and quietly challenged. Compliments came with conditions, advice with expectations. Still, I tried harder, thinking kindness could earn safety. I adjusted my tone, my clothes, even my opinions without realizing how much ground I was giving away. Our engagement only sharpened her interest in my choices, my body, and my loyalty. She framed control as concern, questions as care, and scrutiny as tradition. Friends warned me about dominance disguised as love, but I dismissed them as dramatic or cynical. I believed marriage would reset everything and place healthy boundaries automatically. I told myself love wins, tradition fades, and adults adapt. I trusted that time and commitment would soften old habits and quiet fears. Standing at that wedding table, I realized how wrong I had been. The past was suddenly alive and watching me breathe. It felt close, familiar, patient. Every compromise I had made lined up behind that moment, reminding me that patterns don't disappear just because vows are spoken. I sensed it leaning closer, ready to strike again, silently waiting. And as the music swelled around me, I understood this story didn't begin at the altar. It began long before, and it wasn't finished with me yet, not by a long stretch of hope or denial left inside me now. Something older had woken up, and it wasn't going back to sleep quietly anymore. I stood there, smiling, while memory and instinct collided in my chest, and I knew this was only the beginning of a reckoning I never planned, but would be forced to face before the night was over, and before anyone else realized what had already started to move beneath our feet. The ceremony moved fast, like time was trying to outrun me. Music swelled, chairs scraped, and everyone seemed to breathe at once. I replayed what I saw again and again, analyzing angles, lighting, and intention, searching for any harmless explanation. I asked myself if I could be wrong, if stress or imagination had filled in gaps that weren't there, but my gut refused compromise. It stayed loud, steady, and cold. When the glasses sat side by side, identical and innocent, I acted on instinct. I switched them casually, laughing at a joke I didn't hear, hiding behind the noise of celebration. No one noticed. No one questioned it. That terrified me almost as much as what I had seen. Every nerve in my body stayed alert as speeches began and cameras flashed. Applause crashed over me in waves while my focus narrowed to one person. I watched my mother-in-law more than my new husband, tracking her posture, her hands, her eyes. She looked satisfied, relaxed, almost victorious, like something had gone exactly as planned. That expression told me everything I needed to know. I decided to document everything from that point forward, mentally and physically. I noted times, movements, and who stood where. I paid attention to who hovered near the table and who avoided it. I knew I would need proof, not feelings, because feelings are easy to dismiss and rewrite. The night stretched ahead of me, glittering and dangerous. Laughter felt distant, like it belonged to another room. My hands shook beneath the table, hidden by lace and linen, because I understood something irreversible was in motion. The night was just beginning, and so was the test. I didn't know who would fail it yet. I only knew consequences were seconds away for someone at that table tonight, watching everything unfold, unaware that the smallest switch had already changed the direction of all our lives forever. I kept smiling for the cameras, lifting my glass only slightly, letting the illusion hold. Inside, questions stacked faster than answers, but I stayed present, grounded by resolve. If this was a game of patience, I would not blink first. I told myself to breathe, to remember every detail, and to stay alive to the moment, because truth was about to reveal itself whether I was ready or not. The silence felt heavy, waiting, just before everything finally broke open. Minutes later, the moment arrived that changed the air. My mother-in-law lifted her glass confidently, smiling toward me like we shared a secret. The room felt brighter, louder, almost reckless. I felt my chest tighten as she took a long sip without hesitation, eyes never leaving mine. I pretended to toast, raising my glass just enough to perform, barely touching my drink, my focus locked on her face. At first, nothing happened. Seconds stretched, and doubt tried to creep back in, whispering that I had imagined everything. Then her smile faltered, just slightly, like a crack in porcelain that only I seemed to notice. She swallowed hard, touched her throat, and shifted in her chair. Her eyes darted across the room, searching for something, or someone, who could help her regain control. Panic rippled through her carefully built composure. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, leaking through her posture and breath. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, and music swelled, completely unaware. My body went cold, every hair on my arms lifting at once. I realized whatever she planned was real, intentional, and now unavoidable. There was no harmless explanation left to cling to. I stayed still, recording details in my mind like snapshots. How her hand trembled. How she avoided finishing the glass. How her confidence evaporated in slow motion. This was no misunderstanding or coincidence. This was escalation, unfolding in real time, and it was only starting. I knew intervention would come fast. Staff, family, someone would notice. And when they did, questions would start forming, dangerous ones that could not be smiled away or controlled by her anymore. I kept my face calm, my body steady, as the first invisible domino tipped, and I waited to see who would fall when the noise finally broke. The tension pressed down on me, heavy but clarifying. I could feel eyes drifting, curiosity sharpening, attention slowly bending toward our table. My pulse steadied as fear transformed into focus. I reminded myself to breathe, to remember every detail, to stay present no matter what followed. This was the point of no return. Whatever happened next would not stay private, gentle, or contained. The night had shifted direction, and I was standing at the center of it, waiting for the first voice to ask the question that would unravel everything she thought she controlled before anyone else realized how deep it went. Staff rushed over first, assuming illness or nerves, the usual explanations people reach for when celebration turns awkward. They helped her stand, hands hovering respectfully, voices low and polite. She waved them off too quickly, snapping back control with a sharp gesture that only drew more attention. I watched her struggle to stay upright, to stay authoritative, while her body quietly betrayed her intentions. My husband finally noticed something was wrong. I saw it in the way his smile faded and confusion spread across his face. He leaned toward me, searching for reassurance I couldn't give yet. I stayed quiet, letting events unfold naturally, because stepping in too soon would blur the truth. Inside, fear mixed with a strange, grounding sense of justice. I didn't know what substance she used, and I didn't need to. The intent mattered more than the method. Someone suggested fresh air. Someone else mentioned calling for medical help. Whispers grew, weaving through the room like smoke. The music softened, conversation stalled, and the space shifted away from celebration into concern. The energy turned heavy, focused. She looked smaller somehow, less untouchable than she always seemed. Then she looked at me. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a sharp glance that landed like a slap. In that glare, I saw recognition. She knew what I had done. There was no confusion in her eyes, no illness-induced haze. Just calculation colliding with reality. The power dynamic cracked in public, and there was no undoing it now. People sensed something darker underneath the surface, even if they couldn't name it yet. Eyes lingered. Questions formed. Polite smiles slipped. I realized privacy was about to disappear forever, along with any chance of a quiet resolution between us after tonight. As staff guided her away from the table, conversations resumed in broken fragments, forced and fragile. I stayed seated, hands folded, breathing carefully. My husband hovered between concern for his mother and a growing unease he couldn't explain. I knew I would have to tell him soon, but not yet. Timing mattered. I watched her retreat through the crowd, her authority reduced to whispers and speculation. The room no longer felt like ours. It felt like a stage where something dangerous had been exposed, and everyone knew the final act was coming. The celebration couldn't go back to what it was, and neither could our family. As the doors closed behind her, I understood this was only the second step. The real fallout was still ahead, and it wouldn't stay contained much longer. After she was taken away, I stopped pretending it was over. I stepped out of shock and into focus, because survival doesn't pause for comfort. I asked the venue coordinator for security footage, citing safety concerns instead of accusations. I kept my voice steady, polite, and official. I saved messages, timestamps, and memories before adrenaline faded. I wrote notes on my phone between hugs and apologies. I replayed earlier moments and noticed small things I once ignored. She had hovered near drinks, redirected servers, and insisted on specific seating arrangements. Those details finally connected. Patterns formed the moment I allowed myself to see them. Nothing stood alone anymore. I also took photos of the glass, the table, and the place settings. I captured angles, reflections, and timestamps. It felt surreal documenting my own wedding like a crime scene. My husband was torn between shock and denial. I could see him trying to protect his mother and me at the same time. He asked careful questions without pushing back. That quiet support mattered more than speeches. I didn't accuse yet. I collected. I understood truth needs structure to survive family pressure. Feelings alone would be buried under excuses. This wasn't revenge or anger. It was protection, plain and necessary. As the night ended quietly, I felt the volume of the future rising. Cleanup crews moved faster than my thoughts. I knew she would recover quickly and control the narrative. Her version would come first unless I moved faster. Before morning, I backed up everything twice. I emailed files to myself and stored copies elsewhere. I organized notes into timelines. I labeled photos carefully. I slept barely an hour. Dawn brought clarity, not relief. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was prepared. The evidence existed now. And once truth exists, it demands to be faced. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching light crawl across the wall. My wedding dress hung nearby, heavy with meaning and silence. I realized this story would not stay inside the family. It was already bigger than that. I felt calm in a way that surprised me. Preparation replaced panic. I knew confrontation was coming, but not yet. First, the truth needed space to stand. By the time messages started arriving, I was ready. Questions, confusion, and concern flooded in. I answered carefully, briefly, and consistently. I shared nothing without evidence. This was the foundation. Everything after would be built on what I preserved that night. I sensed the calm before something loud and irreversible. And I knew the next move would decide who controlled the truth. I closed my phone and took a breath. There was no turning back now. What I had gathered would soon speak for itself. And when it did, nothing would remain hidden. That certainty carried me forward. The waiting had begun. And it was dangerous. The twist came from the hospital, not the family. A nurse spoke quietly, choosing words with care, and told us the substance found was a sedative, unprescribed and dangerous with alcohol. That confirmation landed heavy and clean, cutting through doubt without mercy. My fear was no longer intuition. It was fact. My husband's loyalty snapped into focus in that moment. I watched him stop defending possibilities and start seeing intent. The confusion drained from his face, replaced by clarity and anger he had never shown me before. We held hands without speaking, understanding more than words could carry. Before we could even process it, his mother began calling relatives with a rehearsed story. Messages arrived fast, repeating the same phrases about confusion, exhaustion, and an innocent mistake. The consistency told me everything. This wasn't panic. It was strategy. That was when I realized this battle would be narrative-based. Whoever controlled the story would control the outcome. Truth alone wouldn't be enough unless it was timed and protected. I shared the medical confirmation selectively, choosing people who mattered and documenting every exchange. I protected sources and timing, refusing to let leaks dilute facts. I stopped reacting emotionally and started thinking strategically, like someone defending territory instead of feelings. This wasn't about winning arguments or proving I was right. It was about safety, accountability, and preventing history from being rewritten. I created a timeline, drafted statements, and prepared for pushback before it arrived. The truth existed now, solid and undeniable, but revealing it too fast could still backfire. Families close ranks when threatened, and denial can be louder than evidence. I knew the next move had to be final. There would be no partial disclosures or soft landings. Either I acted decisively, or she would reshape the story publicly before I could protect myself and my marriage. As night fell, my phone buzzed with half-truths and sympathy. I stayed silent, watching the lines form. The midpoint had arrived, and the path forward narrowed to one sharp choice. I felt the room closing, timelines compressing, allies choosing sides, and silence becoming a weapon. Each notification hinted at pressure ahead, and every delay raised stakes. I steadied myself, knowing hesitation would invite chaos, while decisive action might burn bridges, yet finally draw a line now. I created distance immediately, cancelling the honeymoon delay and leaving town earlier than planned. I didn't explain the change publicly, I just moved. Motion helped me think. Space helped me breathe. Within hours, we informed close family in writing, choosing clarity over conversation. The message was firm, factual, and final. Boundaries were set clearly, and debate was refused. I insisted all communication go through lawyers and doctors from that point on. No calls, no side conversations, no emotional detours. My husband stood with me without hesitation, choosing unity over denial. That choice changed everything between us. We blocked numbers, documented harassment, and adjusted routines we had never questioned before. Different routes, different schedules. Small changes that created safety. It felt extreme, and I struggled with guilt at first. But peace requires action, not permission. I also reported the incident formally, not to punish, but to protect future gatherings and future people. Accountability isn't cruelty. It's responsibility. Every step felt heavy, yet empowering. I stopped explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. I stopped softening language to make others comfortable with danger. Survival became my priority, not politeness. For the first time since the wedding, I felt control returning to my body. Sleep came easier. Breathing felt deeper. Fear no longer sat in my chest constantly. Still, I knew silence would provoke her. Boundaries often anger those who benefit from none. I understood that distance doesn't dissolve entitlement, it exposes it. I braced myself for retaliation. People like her never accept limits quietly. They test, escalate, and rewrite reality when confronted. And when exposed, they prefer destruction over accountability, especially when witnesses are already watching closely. I prepared emotionally and practically. I reminded myself that backlash doesn't mean I was wrong. It means the boundary worked. Each quiet day felt earned, not lucky. But the calm carried tension underneath it, like a held breath. I knew this phase wouldn't last forever. The next move wouldn't come from me. It would come from someone who hated losing control more than losing relationships. And when it came, it would demand a response I couldn't avoid. As we crossed city limits, I looked out the window and felt something settle. This was the exit, not the ending. The door was closed behind us, but footsteps still echoed on the other side, getting closer, louder, and impossible to ignore for much longer now. Consequences unfolded faster than I expected. Rumors collapsed under medical facts and security timestamps. Relatives who doubted me went silent, then apologetic. Her social standing fractured as questions followed her everywhere. She faced investigations, cancelled invitations, and an uncomfortable spotlight. Karma didn't arrive as drama, it arrived as isolation. I watched from a distance, focusing on healing and routine. Therapy helped me release guilt I never deserved. My marriage strengthened through honesty and shared resilience. I learned that truth doesn't need volume, only consistency. While she fought shadows of her own making, I rebuilt safety piece by piece. Still, I knew avoidance couldn't last forever. Eventually, she would demand confrontation, and I would have to decide how to respond. When that moment came, I promised myself I would not shrink or soften, because survival had already taught me my worth completely, and fear no longer guided my choices or voice. The days after were quieter but not empty. Silence carried weight, and every calm moment felt earned rather than accidental. I adjusted to a new normal, one built on awareness instead of denial. Each morning began with intention, not fear. Friends checked in carefully, unsure what questions were safe. I answered honestly without oversharing, protecting my energy as fiercely as my boundaries. I learned that privacy is power when your story has been targeted. Meanwhile, her world grew smaller. Invitations disappeared, alliances faded, and familiar rooms became uncomfortable. Accountability followed her quietly, without spectacle, and that was the hardest part for someone who thrived on control. I stayed away, resisting the urge to monitor outcomes or celebrate consequences. Healing required distance from the chaos I escaped. Therapy sessions helped me unlearn habits of self-blame and over-explaining. My husband and I rebuilt trust through routine conversations, not grand declarations. We learned how to sit with discomfort without fixing it immediately. That patience strengthened us in ways joy alone never could. I reminded myself often that truth doesn't chase, it waits. Consistency became my language, not defense. I didn't need to convince everyone, only to stay aligned with reality. Still, I knew avoidance couldn't last forever. Distance delays, but it doesn't erase unresolved power struggles. I sensed the pressure building somewhere beyond my view. Eventually, she would demand confrontation, not for healing, but for control. I prepared myself, rehearsing calm instead of fear. I promised I would not shrink, not soften, not apologize for surviving. By then, survival had taught me my worth completely. Fear no longer guided my choices or my voice. I stood ready, knowing the final test wouldn't be loud, but it would be defining. I took a breath, feeling steady, unafraid. The calm before confrontation had arrived finally. The confrontation happened months later in a controlled setting, not a living room or hospital hallway. Lawyers were present, documents organized, facts laid out in careful order. Emotions were contained by structure, and that structure mattered. When evidence removed her escape routes, she denied nothing. There were no tears, no apologies, only visible anger at being exposed. I felt calm, almost detached, listening to accountability finally land where it belonged. My body didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. I wasn't there to argue or convince anyone. I was there to end something. My husband spoke clearly, choosing truth over comfort, and that choice echoed louder than any accusation I could have made. Boundaries were formalized. Consequences were documented. Future contact was restricted in precise language that left no room for interpretation. Each sentence felt like a door closing, solid and final. I didn't feel victory. I felt closure. There's a difference, and I needed the second one to breathe again. The threat was named, limited, and no longer mine to manage alone. Responsibility shifted where it belonged. Walking out of that room, I realized fear had lost its grip on me completely. It didn't vanish in a dramatic moment. It simply had nowhere left to stand. She lost access to us, and that was the real punishment. Not anger. Not humiliation. Distance. Power doesn't disappear quietly when confronted, but it does end when it can no longer reach you. I never looked back after that door closed. Not out of pride, but out of self-respect. I knew healing would continue in layers and seasons. Some days would still be heavy. Some memories would still sting. But the danger was finally behind me. The silence afterward felt earned, stable, and strong. It didn't ask for approval. It didn't need permission. It simply existed. For the first time, my nervous system rested. In the weeks that followed, I noticed small changes. I laughed without scanning rooms. I slept without bracing for interruption. My marriage felt lighter, not because the past was gone, but because it was no longer hidden. I understood then that confrontation isn't about domination. It's about clarity. It's about drawing lines so clear that manipulation has nowhere to hide. And once those lines exist, you don't need to guard them constantly. They stand on their own. As I stepped into that quiet chapter, I felt something settle permanently. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't defending. I was living forward. I closed that door without apology, fear, or the need for approval from anyone ever again. And in that closing, I felt the story finally release me. Looking back, I share this story not for shock, but for warning. I didn't tell it to entertain strangers or collect sympathy. I tell it because silence nearly cost me my safety. Trust your instincts, especially when they whisper instead of scream. Control rarely announces itself loudly. More often, it hides behind smiles, concern, and tradition that no one is allowed to question. Survival sometimes means acting quietly and documenting everything before you are believed. It means choosing clarity over comfort and truth over family pressure. Love should never require swallowing danger to keep peace. If peace demands your fear, it is not peace at all. My wedding taught me something I wish I had learned earlier. Boundaries don't destroy relationships. They reveal which ones were built on respect and which ones relied on compliance. If you're facing subtle sabotage, manipulation disguised as care, or constant pressure to ignore your gut, you're not imagining it. You are noticing patterns your body already understands. Choose safety over silence. Choose truth over tradition. I didn't ruin a family. I stopped enabling harm that thrived on secrecy and politeness. Accountability feels cruel only to those who depend on control. Today, my life is calmer, clearer, and fully mine. I wake up without bracing for conflict. I speak without rehearsing apologies. I love without fear of retaliation. That peace didn't come from forgiveness alone. It came from action. So I want to ask you something honestly. If you saw what I saw, would you act? Or would you drink and hope nothing happened? That choice defines more than a moment. It defines the life you are protecting, and the future you are allowing. If this story helped you name something you couldn't explain before, share it. Not for drama, but for awareness. Silence protects abusers. Awareness gives people time to choose safety while choice still exists. And if you're standing at a table right now, feeling your instincts speak, listen carefully. The decision you make next may quietly save you, long before anyone else realizes you are ever in danger. That moment of choice rarely looks dramatic, but it echoes forward through years, shaping who feels safe, who stays silent, and who learns too late that ignoring intuition costs far more than temporary discomfort or awkward conversations ever will in the end for you and everyone watching. How you protect yourself now today onward.